Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to our Monday Street Fighter Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge. I am Kanzuki Dynasty, and I do have Rillian here. And we are going to be doing our usual thing. Last week we were speculating a little bit about how the lag input delay change would affect the game. Today we get to see a little bit how that goes, see if we notice anything in particular, or anything else related to that. They shaved off something like 2 frames. I don't remember the exact number. Perhaps Rillian does. But otherwise, feel free to join us. As usual, you can stop by our lounge just by searching 3 rounds first to 2 with character select off and looking for Rune Siren in the list.
Round 1. Fight!
In my own test, the thing I found most interesting that it has seemingly had the largest effect on, and given that I definitely have not trained this thing seriously in a while, is my ability to respond to the neutral jump meaty with air throw or something else. It's potentially because this is one of the least intuitive feelings in the game. Meaning that we're much more likely to just hit the button as soon as we can and not wait for confirming things.
I know for me personally, my hope is that it might improve my anti-airs a little bit in terms of just letting me get a few more of those ones where I hit the button and it's the right button, but I hit it just like a couple of frames late and I die. And so I suppose we'll see if that actually becomes an obvious thing that I'm, like, getting right more often than I used to.
Round 1. Fight!
And yes, in this case we do specifically mean literally a couple of frames. While the lag reduction was not that massive, it basically went from often 6 frames to sometimes 4 and sometimes 5 frames, meaning that there are definitely times where you have 2 more frames to react than usual. This is because of how input polling works in fighting games as a whole. It's not really that avoidable. Games can try to make it so that the luck of this is fairly simplistic, that whatever processing is generally happening means that most of the time you'll have the same lag. So there may still be some work that can be done on that. But for the most part, input polling is not really something you can work around so much. You have to do a bunch of little finagling with it, which means that they may still be able to improve the lag stability more if they just have the time to poke at it. But for now, you can assume that sometimes if you were only 1 frame off before, you'll usually be fine. If you're 2 frames off, sometimes you'll be good and sometimes you won't.
In my completely untested opinion, I feel like I am 2 to 3 frames off, so I might get a little better, but not necessarily greatly. The other cool thing that would be, though, is if some of Amara's insane dash-up throw ability that she was demonstrating from her recent training last week, if I can tack a little bit more of that, or respond to it properly in some way. That might be a little harder, because I'm pretty sure I'm farther off of that than I was off from the anti-airs.
After checking a lot of recent matches at that level to see what sort of things we can expect to change, it's actually more likely that Amara will benefit. As we have seen, there are a lot of situations, like an uncanny amount of situations in matches, where she is off by literally 1 frame. Her throw techs are often off by almost exactly 1 frame in certain pressure situations. Uppercuts are sometimes off by exactly 1 frame. And certain confirmations out of parry are often off by basically 1 frame.
Yes, I can
Normally,
imagine.
of course, we would not put so much stress on this, but I'm serious, it has a huge number of effects. So hopefully everyone out there is experiencing the same thing. That 1 frame was all they needed to become way better.
Yes, I can imagine Amara becoming absolutely terrifying in certain parry situations, although I couldn't say what necessarily directly, just because she now can react to it a little bit better, and things of that sort.
Round 2. Fight.
The thing I'm always concerned about in these sorts of minor tweak situations, like input lag or that sort of thing, not necessarily frame data changes, because you can get those out of... You can get those out of, like, actually, like, sort of fixed situations because you're buffering things so everything is exactly on the right frame. But I also, like, worry a little bit about, like, some sort of placebo effect or such. I know that this happened, and so I might be attributing things to it, or just, like, assuming things that I don't really necessarily have actual reason to believe I improved on or such. Anti-airs are perhaps one of those ones where that's not as much the case, because I haven't really trained my anti-airs, at least my standing anti-airs, in the intervening period. I tried to train my crouching anti-airs, but those still have a lot of work to go. So, Well, I have been dropping that combo a little bit, but I don't think that I get to attribute my recent success to the delay change, since combos and stuff are just a straight sequence, and unless you're visually confirming them, which you usually shouldn't be, delay doesn't matter at all.
This is not as true for a few characters. Cody, Fang, and Chun-Li all have stuff where you actually do visually confirm your combos, and you may find that there's some issues coming up. Or just being nervous or concerned about it being different could make it harder to land them. I've definitely fought some Fang today that had some issues that I would not have expected otherwise, and I did have to readjust a little bit for one or two Chun-Li combos.
Okay.
Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight.
Of course, no amount of lag reduction can make up for bad habits such as a strong tendency to get baited into EXDPs on Wake Up.
You lose. Round one. Fight.
Well, that's easier, so maybe that's a thing. The other interesting benefit is that even though the placebo effect I noted might make it so that I attribute things to delay shifts or whatnot that aren't,
Round two.
it also sort of goes in the other direction, because if you perceive that you'll be better at something because of whatever change in the game or any other factor really, it can make you stress less about it, which in turn can actually legitimately help your reaction times for things and such. Simply because you're thinking less about it and wasting less precious milliseconds that way. Relaxing about things has quite a great deal of power in fighting games, or any situation, I suppose, where milliseconds matter. And here you have me wanting to blame that tech not going at the right timing on the lag or something, but I don't know if I buy that. So, I keep calling it lag, but really it's like unlag. Need a better word for that.
Let's do this.
That is a really red Mika costume.
Round one. Fight.
So now that I've been dethroned for reasons of delay changes or otherwise, it comes the interesting question of watching how this sort of thing, or watching other people playing, and trying to think about how this sort of thing is affecting their play, when perhaps you don't play that character yourself, and obviously you're not necessarily directly having the experience.
In this particular one, we can't be sure because we did have a fluctuation earlier to our Spanish Mika where, at least from our side, they went to 1 bar for a short period of time.
I see, and given the display has now frozen, I presume that any matter of reduced display lag is, or well, input lag, actually, I suppose, is not quite going to be the deciding factor in this, former match.
Well, actually, from our side, it's still going. It's not that the match died, it's that your connection to it died.
I see. Well, alright then.
But it does imply that their connection is a bit too slow to actually do this functionally.
Indeed. There are 3
Or at
bars
least
to me at the moment. Oh,
unstable.
indeed. Apparently it's decided to load me back in, so I may get to see a little more. I wonder if that's a new improvement, because I don't remember if it did that before.
Well, regardless of anything else, our Mika player seems to have some very strong intent, which is always a good thing to have on that character.
What is she up to? I've not managed to load back in yet. It still seems to be waiting.
Oh, it looks like Newbie 10 is willing to continue. I guess if it is laggy, it's not like I am not willing to play this laggy. On the other hand, it could just be that there's easier ways to deal with the problem. After all, giving up does give up your spot. So if one wants to continue to play in this situation, either complain and hope that the lounge host does something about it, or give up your turn because you don't want to play in the lag. Or obviously, try to win. But as for their intent, as mentioned before, I'd say that the main thing that makes me say this is they are willing to do just 3 or 4 things and not seemingly get too distracted by the opponent. And these are not frantic things that they're doing, which is why I say this. Generally, they are done with a clear intention to do things based on where they are standing, what they think their opponent is going to do. And this is a good way to get started, even if you don't specifically know what's going on in the match. Pick something and do that something.
Unfortunately, obviously, we don't get to see that, and I can't go, oh, yeah, I can see how that's working myself as a result. But what makes that sort of thing obvious, particularly? How do you, like, pick up on that?
Mostly it is as harsh as it may be to say, it's the opposite of how you play.
I see.
Or at least the opposite of how you play when you're stressed.
All right.
The ability to disregard a particular quote-unquote bad situation, or to disregard the fear of a situation because you have a plan, and whether or not your plan is actually working at the moment, you believe in your plan.
Uh-huh.
So they fundamentally believed, I can jump at you, I can react to things with slide, I can walk up to you and hit light kick into medium punch, and they believed that they could use Mike when the opponent was far away. And that's basically all they did, for the most part.
I see.
They went for like one mix-up once where they walked up and instead of hitting light kick went for command grab and didn't get it right. But there was no wasted movement, no frantic movement that I saw.
Uh-huh.
So they gave the impression that I'm doing these things and I'm going to learn this way.
Round 1. Fight.
I see.
And there are a lot of parts of fighting games where that's super important. Zoners have to learn it because zoning is super complicated, and if you think it's a matter of throwing fireballs, then you probably need to watch Tokido in some like Akuma mirror matches or something. If you don't understand zoning, I strongly suggest you go on YouTube, find any Tokido Akuma mirror match, and you will learn some zoning.
Yes, unfortunately, I find it very difficult to manage to have a plan, have confidence in a plan, hold on to my plan, any of that stuff. Particularly when I'm stressed, but to some degree just generally.
This can be easily done for reactive players as well, but it's harder for them because in order to feel like you have a plan, you have to decide which of the things your opponent is doing you're actually going to respond to, and which things you're going to just let them do. Which involves a lot of losing, honestly.
I see. I think actually that may be partly my problem is that I don't tend to be interested in that whole letting my opponent do X or Y thing that... So then, of course, once you try to react to everything, well, it doesn't go so well.
Generally, this is because in the long run, it's impossible to keep up without a massive amount of training. So, you do have to pick and choose what you're going to try to respond to, or your opponent will just overwhelm you with all their mix-ups and tricks and things. And every time your mind is going, okay, I'll deal with that, you're doing that now, they'll just move to the next one. And frustration players are particularly good at this, of course. You can grind against those particular players for a long time and it will help, but in this sort of situation, for example, new player, new style of Akuma, you have to decide, I'm dealing with this, this, and this, and after that, whatever else you do, okay, it'll hit, so be it.
I suppose on some level I'd probably worry about, well, won't I just lose to the X other thing then? But
yes, you will.
That's...
That's the entire point. You will lose to the other thing. But at least you got to choose which thing you lost to.
I suppose that's fair. Although, not necessarily something I'm good at... Not necessarily a way I'm good at thinking directly. I freely admit I tend to try too hard at a lot of things, and it's often counterproductive.
Round two. Fight. Final round. Fight. Wins. Round one. Fight.
Decent success rate with the parry anti-airs. I don't actually know how much of that is just her training over time versus how much of that would have been from the delay lag or any of this input delay or what any of that.
You say that as if she used to miss parry anti-airs before.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking of it.
Her issue was more so when the opponent did not jump in a way that was parryable.
Round two. Fight.
Or maybe I just feel like she tried it less often. Or maybe less often against me. I don't know.
That's actually for a completely separate reason.
Fair enough.
It's partially because you know that she will parry often enough that you started to jump without hitting buttons. Therefore she was not doing anything.
Indeed.
Final round. Fight.
So I suppose the trick would be deciding what thing I want to particularly not die to, and what things, therefore, I am perhaps okay to dying to. feel like I want to
Akuma
perhaps
wins.
not die to his, like, loops or pressure or such, but I'm not sure if that's perhaps too general. What I would probably lose to in that case
Well,
is...
here's a different way of looking at it. Can you pinpoint what exactly loops or pressure are being used in the first place?
No, my memory of my matches is not quite clear enough for that, and
Well,
I
then
was
watch
trying to
someone else's
pinpoint it,
matches.
and so did not quite get there yet. And I feel like he's playing just slightly differently against the other opponents just because they are different.
That is actually a placebo effect that happens because you are stressed. You are able to become completely convinced that your opponent is playing meaningfully differently because when you look back at what they're doing against other people, you go, that looks slow, that looks like I could deal with it. They can't possibly be doing the same things against me. That's
I
not true.
see.
90% of the time, your opponent at this level of play will not change their methods or tactics unless your character has a very specific way out of it, and then maybe they'll change it a little bit. But even when they try, you'll often see the same things. For example, this opponent hits crouch medium punch, and then something, almost all the time. So if you could stop it, then do so. Now, it's not as simple as that because they don't hit the second thing unless they're in range for the second thing. But I would say that at least 80% of the time, if you get hit by one crouch medium punch and you've blocked it, assume that another button is coming.
Alright. Honestly, I think part of my problem is, in fact, just the whole trying to not lose to any of the things and trying to keep track of all of them, and that just blurring my focus as a result. So I'll give that a shot and see what happens. And then stack things on top of that, perhaps, where I have space to, mentally.
Now, of course, one should note that it is generally true that an opponent will adapt as quickly as they can. So what you should generally do is, as soon as you manage to stop something once, try to kill them. Don't just go practicing more of it, because they're not going to do more of it.
Fair. Alright.
It is actually a super important point in this game to learn what literally every character in the game's crouch medium punch looks like. Because if you don't know it, you're going to get hurt at the lower levels. Always learn what that move looks like, because it's almost always plus, and it's almost always leading into another move from close range. Whether that be a jump that you have to react to, or another button that you should parry. Or uppercut, or whatever you have available to deal with that situation, honestly.
Alex wins.
Well, if I wasn't going to recognize it before, I have observed his crouch medium punch from that match, so... got that much for the moment. As far as responses go, though, it's a little trickier. Without my V-trigger on Karine, I don't have any options to deal with a plus button directly, other than, like, V-reversal or such things. Or, like, EXDP itself. Which I can imagine being quite devastating if they hit, like, crouch medium punch and I managed to EXDP, they'd possibly second guess a little bit. That seems difficult, but maybe worth trying. 'Cause I don't actually technically know how difficult it is.
There is one thing you should always consider in this game, and it is something that you would have learned from the same situations in Eunice that we were discussing before. The reason you feel as if you're constantly getting hit by crouch medium punch into stuff is because you keep getting hit by crouch medium punch into stuff. And I don't mean that as that's all your opponent does. I mean that it loops into itself, therefore every time you fail, you end up facing it again. If you could defeat it on the first step, you would end up facing it much less, because they would not be able to do it.
Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. Nope. Alright, well, it's recovered a bit as far as my side goes.
Akuma wins. Round one. Fight.
Looks like I won. All right.
Round two. Fight.
So much of ranking up in this game, I'm not going to speak about levels of skill because that is a different assessment, but a lot of ranking up or winning certain matches in this game is really about how much weird stuff you can stop. Once you've gotten to the level where most of the weird stuff that you see normally you can stop, the weird stuff at that level, then you probably, if you were skilled and generally probably fairly good at controlling the way you felt about matches, you would probably just get through. Okay, so now I guess we get to see whose internet it was that actually destabilized there.
Indeed. Well, I'm a little more familiar with this matchup. Although I was looking forward to trying out my... Can I actually react to the crouch medium punch bit?
Doesn't look like either. I don't know what happened. Most likely I did. Oh, no, there we go. Now I can see.
Alright, well for me DeWolf is 5 bar and our Akuma friend is 3.
But I was looking for stability. In other words, watching to see the polling, and of the two of them, the Akuma's was the one that dropped to 1 bar for momentarily.
Aha.
Whether or not this is the connection to the server and all those things or not, the point is that if the only thing I'm judging it on is whose bar is dropped, well, then that's the person whose bar is dropped.
I don't think I saw it on my side. So noted.
Okay.
Round one. Fight.
Maybe he's somehow slightly closer to me. So here's the matchup where I can use that placebo effect to my advantage. Because some of the reason I don't anti-air, or some of the reason I've had trouble with this matchup in the past, as I've discussed on this stream before, is that I end up being afraid of his head crush and whatever the other one was called. But if I perceive that I can anti-air it possibly better,
Then you will still lose because you were never supposed to anti-air it in the first place.
fair point. I'd only managed to reload half of my recent experiences in this matchup.
Round two.
But yes, given that fact, that reminder to review, part of my problem is not so much that it happens or that I can't stop it, it's that I'm afraid of it, and it makes me do other things that are weird, because if that's all he can really land on me, then I'm not necessarily doing too poorly, and it doesn't do extreme damage, but if I start worrying too much about that, he can do everything else that would actually be much more harmful. So actually perceiving that I can anti-air it or such, I can't tell if that should be helpful or not. It might make me fear it less, but it might also make me behave incorrectly.
You win.
The problem with anti-airing or feeling as if you should anti-air things like head crush is that the better solution is to jump. Jump will take you out of the way of the move. What happens afterwards might be complex, but the jump will get you out of the move. If you
Indeed.
attempt the anti-air and fail, you will get hit.
Round one. Fight.
To be fair, I think I like jump as a solution better just personally anyway. So I'll try to do that instead then.
Depending on the distance Alex is coming from, you can actually just jump forward with medium kick, which is the thing I've normally told people to do. If you do a jumping forward medium kick as if you intended to cross him up, then most of the time this will land. It may knock him out of the air, but most of the time it will land. Alex in turn can control the distance he goes with that move to make it so that you are repositioned, but he can't necessarily make sure that he hits you. The better use for that move is exactly as shown just now, being able to avoid playing footsies.
Which is probably why I
Because it
don't
is
like
just
it in the
fast
first
enough that
place.
unlike a jump, it will grab the person after they've stuck out their medium kick or whatever. After most medium kicks, you can block before your opponent can jump all the way in to get you. But for those moves, it does not generally work, and since you can just do head crush if you're going to happen to actually be blocking, then they usually fail anyway because they're blocking. So Alice is similar to Colleen in that a lot of the time, you don't really want to play footsies with Alice in the first place. It's just a habitual thing that people do. The idea that I should hit buttons to stop Alex from walking toward me is not necessarily counterproductive, but is unlikely to matter too much.
You win.
I suppose he wouldn't necessarily tend to do that all that much anyway. And if he does, it's probably one of the better things for me that he could be doing out of his option set. Drops his charges, is slow relative to some of his flash chop or other such moves, and I can just react to it.
Let's do this.
Aha, dojo stage. I forgot about that.
Round one.
I'll need to go customize it at some point.
Fight. Round two. Fight.
I'm still confused by the fact that everyone gets to set up the dojo stage separately.
Yeah,
Who's the deal with this?
I was observing yours earlier, and that made me think, wait, hold on, now is this something that I have too? And it turns out that not. It's quite strange. I guess we have dojo ninjas to rearrange the place every time a different person decides to train there.
But you can, in an act of solidarity, do this. You can make sure that everyone has the same dojo, which is interesting because I fought someone today from the dojo of the 108 Dragons. And you can guess what was in the background of their stuff.
How did they fit that many dragons?
Well, they were short 106, but it was still cool looking.
Fair enough.
But I do appreciate the fact that that is basically a choice level. You can. What I think would probably have been better though is if they made it so that you could just turn on and off the default of your own dojo to simplify
Yes.
things.
That would probably have been the best option.
Maybe we can petition them for it.
Somehow I didn't expect him to land that punish.
You lose.
That said, this dojo stage is, by most standards, really good.
Guess I'll have to see what there's even available for it. I don't know how we get
Not only
stuff.
that part,
Round one.
I just meant in
Just the
general.
base.
Fight.
I see.
I thought we were supposed to get a trophy, but I'm not sure we actually got it, and I don't understand how that went. I'm not really interested in doing that. That's the sort of thing that you display when you won a premiere or something. Put it out for like a week.
I won a premiere, I would keep it up for more than a week.
Yes, but by the time you were winning premieres, you might have changed your mind about that.
Probably.
Round two. Fight.
Alright then.
How irritating. Final
He did not
round.
come near enough his reflector way back when for me to land the EXTP on him through it.
You win. Round one. Fight.
This match, I think I'm going to go back to practicing the holding my spot.
The dojo is good for holding one spot. The spot is very clearly defined. And in a way this helps because it gives Cosmic Wolf time to practice actually zoning specifically. As it's, again, not really a matter of just throwing fireballs. Here's another good example of when the situation is in your favor. Learning how to sit there and wait for your opponent even though they have the life lead. Because you have some idea of how you plan to get in on them, how you plan to take advantage of the fact that you have, say, meter advantage, or that your V-trigger is going to run out at a different timing than theirs is, and so on. Means you can do this. Whereas getting flustered and going in because you have
Round two.
a life deficit
Fight.
is generally a bad idea unless you have a big one. And if you have a big life deficit and the round has gone on for a long time, you probably lost anyway.
There, I've recovered my spot. Oh, I'm using the wrong thing against him there. There we are. And finished dead on my
Now,
spot.
that one is definitely something that for pretty much every character in the game, it will now be easier to do. Characters who can move through projectiles will definitely be able to do it more. Projectiles have enough startup that more or less if you were doing the reaction before and you had any chance of getting it right, 2 extra frames to do it has definitely improved your situation. Period. As it is probably the most binary situation in the game.
Oh, good stuff. You might convince him to be slightly more aggressive. Gave me my spot back, though. That was his fatal mistake. And my fatal mistake was trying to go in without quite enough respect for his fireball rhythm. I knew I wanted to go over it, but I managed to get myself to delayed somehow, so alas, my Rasenha was hit in startup.
Well, as noted, you generally have problems with zoners because you as a player often underthink zoning. Whereas zoners spend a lot of time thinking about their zoning, and therefore you are at disadvantage automatically.
Yes. Are there any particular ways I underthink it, or is it just more of a general thing? Because I know I don't think about it nearly as much as actual zoners.
A zoner's goal is to condition your behavior using their fireball. It is not to keep you out. There are very few zoners who are even strong enough to keep you out using their projectiles. Basically just Dalsim and Fang, really. And even they probably would prefer not to have to do it that way for too long. They're trying to make you respond, go to a particular place, and so on. So, for example, trying to make you think, I am throwing a fireball where you could jump at me. And you are supposed to think, I can jump that, and then you get uppercut.
I see. So in my case, my problem really was that after his stream started, I wanted to use it to Rasenha into CA to win. And I don't know, did he change his rhythm at all, or did I just end up messing myself up?
Nope, that was a changed rhythm.
Alright, good stuff then.
I'm not sure if the speed was changed. I was not watching closely enough the speed of the fireball, but I know the rhythm changed, and you therefore went, okay, I'm gonna do this. And because what happens, in fact, is a really good trick. The human brain does things in beats, like basically time stamps. Meaning that if your opponent is throwing fireballs at a specific rhythm, you expect each one at the next beat.
Yep.
If they skip half a beat, you still skip a whole one.
Ah. That is good stuff.
And it does take a while to learn not to do this in fighting games. It's partly why Guile is so effective, at lower levels especially. Because this happens for quite a long time, I think, if you're really, like, stressed out by the opponent in any way. In Guile's case, it's particularly bad because you can't jump over his either, for the most part.
I see.
In fact, there's actually a famous example of this from that rematch between Daigo and Infiltration a while back. Daigo simply changed his fireball timings by half a beat in certain places. Now, Infiltration caught on pretty fast, but given that his strength versus Daigo in the set they played before was that he was predicting so many of the fireballs, it wasn't, oh, Infiltration can't handle this and got caught by it, it's that Infiltration has to fight Daigo at terms, basically. Back to normal, but with a little bit of off feeling to go with it, and therefore it worked out.
I see. So really, if I had just literally stayed there and kept sitting on my spot, I probably would have managed.
You would have been chipped out, or, well, not chipped out, but eventually have lost so much health there's no way to win.
That's what I was afraid of, sort of. So I guess I did have to do
And that
something.
brings us back to our general position. Sometimes you have to recognize that barring a skill you don't necessarily have perfected yet, you've lost a round. And that is just a thing that happens in fighting games.
Oh, sure, all the time.
So that was your situation. You had lost because his zoning was going to beat you, unless you managed a very specific thing that is difficult.
Fair enough. And then I did not manage my Rasenha check or whatever. It's a very nice way to look at the game because it sort of calms you down a lot in just the sense of understanding your limitations and not stressing about them because you can train them and you just haven't yet, or other such things.
Well, let's go back to talking about the strong intent of our Mika players. If you look at it, while they are sometimes being specifically aggressive, it's not wild usually. They've more or less decided, I am doing this thing. And I'm jumping at this spot, moving to exactly this spot and doing this thing.
Urian wins.
Alright then. And so we are for the moment back to the usual.
Let's do this. Round one. Fight.
In fact, if you have two zoners fighting, you get to watch a lot more of it, but you have to try to understand it at a level that is a little bit more than, oh, they're just throwing fireballs and eventually one of them will win. Because
Right,
they also know the beats of their anti-fireball tools if they haven't.
Yes, if I wasn't watching for it, I wouldn't necessarily have paid a whole lot of attention to it, but Cosmic Wolf, that moment, really did set that up so as to be able to execute the armor at that point. And it was worth the extra charge to do so.
A foolish insect that dares to defy me. Round two. Fight. You can't run.
Ooh, very nice.
Final round. Fight. You can't.
That's actually partially why whenever the fireball timing for a character is changed, it can throw off the player quite a lot. Even if they didn't use it that much, it can really upset your rhythm in different ways because it changes your beat.
I presume they try to avoid that sort of change in games then.
I believe that only 2 characters in this game have ever had their fireball timing changed.
Who was it?
Nash, I think. Maybe not though, because it could easily be that it wasn't. And Chun-Li's was changed at the end of Season 1.
I see.
Which took me from, I probably shouldn't use Kikoken, I'm not good at it, to, I'm never using Kikoken again. This is not true, of course, this is an exaggeration, but as a tool for space control, I do not use that move anymore. It is for making people annoyed from very far away. And fighting Dawson.
I see.
And in the case of Dhalsim, is actually the intention of a Kikoken is never to hit Dhalsim with it like it traveling. It is specifically this is the safest way to hit outstretched limbs.
I see. I suppose it would be. You can't get counter hit because if you're like just blatantly out of range, timing can't be off or anything. There's no whiff punishing there.
Round 2. Fight.
I suppose thinking about this beats bit, it actually sort of also explains to me why I do have trouble with punishing Dhalsim's limbs when we get into that sort of a dance. Or perhaps partly why I am uncomfortable with it.
Yes, the rhythm of usage of limbs on Dhalsim is one of the most important parts, in my opinion, of playing the character at the mid-levels. You have to know a lot of setups and cool things in order to be able to keep it up or get a lot of damage or such when you've gotten an advantage. But getting the advantage in the first place, or staying safe long enough to utilize it, requires that you understand that pretty well.
Ryu wins.
Fortunately, despite my concern, the CPU Dhalsim does in fact do a decent job of varying the beats and rhythm of its stuff, and since it does at least a bit read your inputs, for example, you can definitely get it to throw out limbs more often if you are crouch blocking than if you are walking back.
Uh-huh.
It's not like, oh, it will always do one or the other, but there is some difference. It's fairly easy to test, or you can just watch someone else do it and observe. It's harder to do it when you're the one playing because you're usually trying to stop the limb, and if you are not moving, then he doesn't change too much. But watch someone else fight CPU Dhalsim and it'll start to become visible.
Well, I may have to tune in for your next training session with him then.
It's like a stream.
Oh yeah. Just watch a bit of that later.
Round 1. Fight.
For characters like Zangief and Alex, understanding the beat's rhythm is just as important, but from Ryu's side, Ryu has to work in something else. He has to decide, should this beat be a fireball or like a solar plexus strike? And this isn't really about guessing whether or not the opponent is going to go for one thing or the other. Because normally, the opponent does not want to just jump randomly. They want to respond to something Ryu does. They may dash semi-randomly, but generally not jump. At higher levels anyway. Ryu is therefore waiting to see if the opponent's movement or lack of movement indicates that it is time for him to try something like that. Or if it means it's time for another Hadouken. This is super hard to learn because it feels random at first, but it's really not random. Like, you can... One of the most blatant reasons why we can tell you this is not random is because of people like John Choi who can just do this as an entire battle strategy.
I see.
Final round. Fight.
He's just that good at reading or setting up his opponent's mindsets.
Ryu has a lot of tools that help with this, but the amount of mastery it takes to get the fireball part right is, well, I'd say almost daunting. But if you love the character, it's probably fine.
Alex wins.
But again, if you're interested in that, don't learn it from me. And you can learn it from Amara if you are in bronze or around there. At least the basic parts of it by watching. If you feel that that doesn't make sense, or you don't understand that this is a top level technique, then yes, go find a Tokido mirror match. Because Tokido has reached a point where he will be in the Fireball War, walking back and forth, and stand without blocking. Just get to a particular point on the screen and stand still. He's not crouch blocking, he's not walking backward and therefore blocking. He's just standing.
I dream of being able to do that. On that note, I suppose I should sort of ask, how much does the input lag shift affect that sort of gameplay? Because I know that you noted that it affects...
I know that it's been said from the beginning that everyone really wanted the lag to be lower so that they could play in that way. I don't understand it fully. I can grasp why mechanically it should make a difference. But given the philosophy and the design of the game, I don't think it would affect most people, because the sort of person that can play that at a high level can do it in up to, in my opinion, 7 frames of lag.
What are we at now exactly?
Or rather,
anyway?
they can do so in 7 frames of lag with the current design philosophy of the game's buttons and spacing. And we are currently at 4.5.
Okay.
That was the number we were given.
Alright.
We are at, on average, again, 4 frames of lag about half the time and 5 frames of lag the other half of the time.
Alex wins.
But rather than think about that so simply, it's more so that if your input is pulled within the latter half of the frame,
It's go time.
then technically it will generally be 5 frames of lag, and if you were within the first half of the frame, it will be 4. As a general thing.
What does
So
determine that?
it's still at least some up to you. Again, it's polling. There's a certain amount of time that the game takes to process the fact that you hit the button. and that is measured in milliseconds in itself. So let's assume it is actually exactly 77 milliseconds, I believe. Something like that. That it's exactly 77 milliseconds every time for it to fully process what you did, but the game can only start a move on an actual frame. So sometimes you'll be in one frame and sometimes you'll be in the other.
I see.
This is actually true of literally every game that exists at the moment, but input lag has a lot more to do with delay of visual processing, VSync, those sorts of things.
Well, I suppose I will study that at some point, but for the moment...
This is how we get Guilty Gear with its one frame of lag on PC.
If he warms up twice in a row, it doesn't buff him more, does it?
No,
Okay.
but it does buff his V meter, which means that if he's close and you decide to leave him there so he can do it, then he's getting benefits.
I see. Alright then.
Round 2. Fight.
But yes, that style of standing still actually requires a fairly absolute level of confidence, because if you are not super confident that you can stop anything, or that the things you can't stop you don't care about stopping,
You win.
you will flinch. And flinching, by the nature of the game, flinching takes 6 frames.
Why is that?
For some people, a full flinch takes 6 frames. And you can measure it in Under Night if you are setting up the correct things. Why?
Round 1.
This is because the propagation delay of mental command to your hand has a secondary delay to it. In other words, you sent one message to the muscle to press X button, you suppressed that message, and then you sent another message. And then there's like a basically cooldown timer almost. So there's a massive difference in terms of time between pressing back for a moment before you anti-air and just anti-airing.
I see. Well, I know that I definitely flinch when I try to do it.
Fight.
I want people to do that someday, though. I feel it must be terrifyingly, deliciously unnerving to my opponents if I can pull it off fully correctly.
I'd say no.
No?
In fact, my personal experience is that you should not work on that ability for a long time.
I see.
And I mean a long time. Like, wait until you get to Diamond before you even care. Because the response of most opponents I have found, all the way up to Platinum, the few times I've fought Platinum players, is that they don't so much get unnerved as they stop fighting,
Mm.
which is a reasonable response to have, but it's not helpful to you unless your level of offense and intimidation based on that offense is real enough that a very experienced tactical player will be in some way intimidated by that concept. In short, if you have no offense, it does not make any sense whatsoever to get to that level of defense mentally.
I see. Well, alright then.
This may not be true if you play a character that is really good at getting life lead.
Oops. There we go.
You win. It's go time.
Occasionally it can be useful to have an opponent stop fighting for a little bit to recollect yourself, but those probably aren't so much the times where you're confident enough to cause it in that way.
There is a point at which it does become useful though, if you want to temporarily learn it. Just not the sort of thing that we were mentioning to you.
I see. Well, regardless, I won't worry about it for now.
No, it ties back in fairly well. If you
Oh.
are listening and learning your opponent's beats,
Ah,
watching for the cutoff where they stop attacking or moving can teach you a lot about them.
I see. It tells you basically what the alignment is in a way.
hmm This is a relatively complex concept at beginner levels, but you can definitely stop hitting buttons and see at what point of your opponent's flow they stop hitting buttons.
I see.
Round two.
Anyway, back to my spot on the ground. Yep, there I got tricked
For
again in the
example.
same ways. Twice in a row.
One of Cosmo's other strengths that I believe picked up at least partially from a particular fight at Shine, or a particular set of fights at Shine, is that he can get to a place where the opponent thinks he might armor up, and he throws the fireball instead. Because many opponents, on the idea he may armor up, approach in order to prevent it.
Ah,
But if he's wrong and throws the fireball anyway, there's so little a chance that they were prepared to jump or counter the fireball that it's just not informational. So this works really well against Kami players.
Round one.
It might.
Fight. You can.
The other thing that makes this strong is that the way Urian's fireball pushback works means that if you block the fireball, then he really can armor. So it's just a complete win situation. As long as he starts there, it's should I go for armor or should I throw the fireball? And once that decision is made, either he will have guessed wrong and gotten punished for going for armor, or he will have gotten to put up armor. This is part of the reason why he has to work on and has been working so hard on anti-airs, because it is at that same spot where if he hesitates, the opponent is likely to jump. Which works fine if he preemptively threw out the high fireball, but if he was thinking about it, rather than actually doing that, the anti-air has to be ready.
What happened with his EX and my parry back there?
Round two.
I have no idea.
Fight.
The only weakness I would find in Urian, not necessarily in Cosmic Wolf's style of Urian, is that part of the problem with the way Urian armors up when he's using the zoning style is that the only good thing to do with the armor is the same thing you would have done without the armor, i.e. put up armor.
I see. That seems a little strange.
You can be daring and try to set up certain things with it. Specifically long-range headbutt when your opponent is trying to wiggle. But as you've noted, wiggling isn't really required.
I'll admit that you have some skill.
Final round. Fight.
This is also partially why I truly believe that giving him Tyrant Pressure as his other V-trigger was a good idea for at least some players, because they have that zoning style, they can use it in that way, and then on top of it, use that move to get stuff. However, using that move properly is so difficult by most standards that you're generally just stressing yourself out. I figure someone will eventually master it, but I'm not really looking forward to it, as it seems like it would be a very stressful thing, and most likely they'd lose a lot at tournaments first or something, and we'd see snippets of them fighting someone and it not quite working out. Which is always, I wouldn't call it painful to watch, but there's a lot of hidden technology in the game as a whole that makes it difficult for people to be innovative in the strict sense, given that you have to grind it for so long in order to make sure it works.
It's go time. Let's do this.
Alright then. Back to the beginning with Amara.
Round
Alas, I cannot benefit from any of this input delay reduction on the dash throws because I just don't have the reaction ready for them to be off by a few frames even. So I suppose given that, if anything, should be the way I would choose to lose for the moment.
Round one. Fight.
Just because choosing to train that in this context would drop too many stacks. I need a bot for that. Luckily, I'm pretty sure we have bots for that. Ed, I believe. Or was he the offensive one?
Our throw-related bots are Cammy and Ed,
Ah, yes, it was Cammy that was the defensive one. Alright.
and also M. Bison.
I'll admit that you have some skill.
Round two. Fight.
And that is why she does not want to parry you, because after a while you just empty jump every time. I'm not sure if you've realized you're doing it, but it's a lot.
I think it's fair to say I've realized it once today, so...
Well,
I'm
you
just
have
that
already
used to
done
her.
it 5 times, so if you've only realized you did it once, then congratulations on doing it automatically, I guess.
Indeed. I'm sure I thought about it, but not on a level that I would remember.
Fight.
Though if I decide that the dash-up throws are just what I'm going to lose to, it opens up a lot of space for anti-airing correctly and just standing at that exact right range for whiff punishing basically every other option she has. Which is quite nice from my perspective, I suppose.
You win.
So I'll just have to go and spend some time with Camibot. I want to close any more of that gap. Which I might do for next week. But I have so many other things I also want to do, so
Fight.
we'll see. Ah, see, and now I'm getting too aggressive for myself. And interestingly, that all that together leaves open the mental space for me to have, let's call it half a stack space open for just dealing with it automatically because I'm focusing on a particular spacing, for instance, and react as a result of that. That was terrifying. Ah. Alright then.
Final round.
This actually works in the other direction as well. If your opponent can stop you from doing something that you normally do, but is so ingrained in you that you just do it all the time, they've increased your stress by that stack worth regardless. For example, your crouch medium punch into crouch medium kick is parryable. It's also jabbable, uppercuttable, bunch of things.
Yes. I've not been punished nearly as much as I deserve to be for that in my experiences thus far in Street Fighter. I was asking for that. Alright then.
You win.
I can't really explain it, but somehow, doing that, managing to let go of the, for instance, the throws bit like that, seems to just, and all the relaxation and shifts that I mentioned come from that, seems to just like
Let's do this.
make the game. I mean, it sort of makes it easier, but I guess I can't find the words for what I'm trying to say. But it seems like it makes it more fun, just in the sense of increasing the experience. Not even necessarily improving directly, but like increasing the experience, because now I have the space to be aware of what's going on, and rather than going, oh dang, I'm out of position or I got hit or whatever, I can actually feel the proper stress of, oh crap, because this happened and I'm keeping up with it. So,
Round one.
for all my rambling explanation, you probably have some idea what I mean.
I'm all warmed up.
Yes, it's the same thing that puts me to sleep when I fight certain players.
I see.
Because eventually, you get really good at that. And eventually, opponents who don't have any offense of their own feel like they're not playing the game.
I see.
It's not really that they are necessarily doing badly. In fact, they could be doing super well. But because it's so easy to see when something goes wrong from your side even, you can still be playing terribly or still be making mistakes that cause you to lose. But because you can see your own mistakes so easily, it loses a lot of meaning. And since your opponent is generally, if they don't have very good offense or in some cases no offense at all, they can't actually do anything except wait for you to make those mistakes.
And then you
So
just
in a
stop
weird
stressing.
way, it comes off as boring because it's just, okay, I'm playing the game, and if I make X number of mistakes, I'm going to lose, and if I don't make those mistakes, I'm going to win. And it's that second part that, while it does not make it in itself boring, it's stale. Let's put it that way.
You win.
really do like the game much better when I can see my own mistakes and just process things in that way.
Round one. Fight.
Well, I hope that continues for you. I mean, you do play Karine, so I suppose it will not be as... The flow may not be as boring because players... There are certain characters that players must react to and can't just avoid. Because one of the larger changes to Chun-Li at the end of Season 1 that made it such a big deal for so many people is that she was changed from a character where she could command your attention.
Uh-huh.
You couldn't just walk away and assume that was going to be fine. Because once she got you down, she had the, at that time, extremely unfair, probably still would be very unfair, plus on block air legs.
I need to stop
Meaning
hitting
that you
sweet.
could not occupy the space in front of her and hope she made a mistake. Ryu was also changed in this way, just in many more small ways that tied together. This doesn't specifically affect the viability of either character, but it affects the mindset you play them with. If you want to talk about viability of either character, you need to talk about things like specifics of frame data or metered options versus unmetered options, but there are definitely minor things that they did with them that made them easier to walk away from.
Round one. Fight.
I keep doing that. The worst part is I meant to do EX Mujin to begin with.
Round two. Fight. You win.
Personally, I'm actually wondering whether or not the reduction in lag may make Nash stronger again in a very specific way, in that it may make Nash more like Karine as a character. Nash has some very high accuracy requirements on some of the moves he does. Specifically that if he is within 2 or 3 frames of this hitbox on your end while you're in the air, with his movement, then you get hit, and otherwise you tend to hit him. Being able to now react to certain jump situations and certain distances and properly time those things may make the character a little bit harder to get away from, in the sense of I'm going into the air to prevent Nash from doing anything to me.
Ah.
And if you've seen relatively beginner to intermediate play, people spend a lot of time getting away from Nash like that.
Round one. Fight. Take this. How's this? I'll savor this.
I can see.
Round two. Fight. You can. I'll savor this.
That was kind of cool.
You win. Round one. Fight. You can. I'll savor this. How's this? I'll savor this. Take this. I'll savor this. How's this?
One other fortunate aspect of this style of Urian, though, is that since you are so
Fight.
able to do it by just using regular moves, he can save the armor for wake-up stuff, or for things like that where he knows he's in footsie range but wants to do something.
Take this. I'll savor this.
This, of course, does not help you as much if you are low on health, meaning that it's a kind of a mismatched tactic in some ways. You have to be able to hold the opponent out for fairly long in order for the armor to be any use to you on wake up. But can you do that without having to use the same sorts of specials that take up the armor?
Will he burn the armor even if his special doesn't absorb the hit?
Mm-hmm. He
Oh.
doesn't even have to hit you.
Time.
As long as he does a move at all, the armor goes away, which is part of the stress of it.
I see.
Let's do this.
But Sunder has appeared for what is the final match of the night, so we can just assume that he put in an appearance, quote unquote.
Alright then.
But this is indeed our last on-stream match of the night, and tonight in particular, the lounge is actually closing at the end of stream, as we have a specific analysis to go do afterwards.
Fight.
That said, we did get our Dragon Ball Fighters Super Dash bot up this weekend. You can go check that out at our website 2-mk.org. Remember that if you've already input the Dragon Ball Fighters bot for any other bot or for any other reason, you don't have to change anything. It's just a matter of which team, which settings, and understanding what the aim is. So there's no work to do on that regard if you've already got it. Tomorrow we should be having our Guilty Gear Tuesday train stream. Our Guilty Gear at Zard Rev 2 East Coast Lobby. Loser stays on. Feel free to join us. That one lasts 1 hour longer than this one, but starts at the same 7 Eastern. On Wednesday, we will most likely be having either open mic or standby casuals, again in Street Fighter V, as our month-long Unist series is actually over for now.
Round 1. Fight.
We may see more of this at some later point. Probably not this year, but who knows, toward the end of the year you might see something.
I can do what? Timing on that is insane though.
On Thursday, we'll be having Kame House, our Dragon Ball Fighters Beginners Lobby. Once again, US East Coast. Loser stays on. And on Friday, one more. Dead or Alive last round. As we have no disc guidance this week. Of course, that brings us back around to next Monday and our Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge once more. It may be a little different then in terms of who is actually in the lounge, but don't count on that. Might just be the usual suspects once again.
Well, that is the reason they are the usual suspects. So on that note, if you want any of the bots that we have been talking about, either for Dragon Ball Fighter just now or for Street Fighter, you can find them at our website 2-mk.org. You can find out what we're doing each day of the week, what stream to be expecting, whether there's a lobby to join, on our Twitter 2_mk_FGC. And otherwise, we hope to see you later this week, or if not, certainly next week Monday. Have a good night, everyone.